This is the Anthrobiology Podcast, hosted by me, Gabby LaPera. Every 2 weeks, I interview a biological anthropologist about what makes us, us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. Joining me here today, I have Doctor in Progress, Keri Porter.
Yeah, Doctor in Progress.
From
Dr.
Notre Dame. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have you. We actually met at the American Association for Biological Anthropologists conference in Baltimore this year.
Yes.
Which is really cool. This is the first year I've ever gone, and people were wildly nice to someone who was just like, I just like anthropology and I don't work here.
Yeah, it's always like really, really kind people. And I always joke because it's like my Oscars. So there's all these famous people around that you're
Yes.
like, I read their papers. And it's when I was an undergrad, it was really fun because I could go up and introduce myself to them and know that they would forget who I was about 15 minutes later. And you're like, yay, it's like the Oscars. And once you start to like be in the field long enough that they start to remember you, it gets less fun. So I feel like it's less fun for me now, but
That's
it
so
was
funny.
really fun when I was younger.
No, I mean, I interviewed Clark Spencer Larson last year for my show, and he and his wife remembered me, which was crazy. I was like, you talked to me for an hour a year ago. That's nuts. And then someone I was meeting for coffee saw me talking to him, and they're like, I didn't want to interrupt. Like, it was Dr. Larson. Like, I was too scared to walk up. I was like, you should have come up because clearly they're the nicest people in the world.
Oh yeah. He asked a question at a poster I was presenting with one of my undergrad. Well, she's no longer an undergrad, but undergrad at the time, research assistants. And when he walked away, I was like, "Do you know who that was?" And she goes, "Yes." And then just kind of called over, like I think it's very common for people to get really nervous around these
Yeah.
people that like you almost build up in your head because you read their work and you're like, "Oh my gosh, they're unattainably, intelligent and they're so accomplished." But I feel like the stars really are just like us. And
Yeah.
so
We need a People magazine of just like, I don't know, like Clark Spencer Larson grocery shopping so that we're like, oh, it's okay. I can talk to him.
yeah, like it's okay. They're all just people.
That's so funny. Well, what we were here to talk. We were here to talk about you and your research and a little bit about grad school in 2025 in the United States. Your area of specialization is the early Bronze Age.
Yeah. So my dissertation research, which is, everyone goes, "Oh, my dissertation," you're like, it's all you think about. So my dissertation research focuses on the early Bronze Age and the Southern Levant, which is an area made up of Israel, Palestine, Jordan, South Syria, and Lebanon. And so this kind of area in the Near East is really, really interesting around the early Bronze Age because they're experimenting with this concept of urbanization. So it's not really what's going on in Mesopotamia. It's not what's going on in Egypt, even though they're both kind of doing their own urbanization thing. They're kind of doing their own stuff in the Southern Levant. So it's a really, really interesting place because they are kind of accumulating in these walled communities that are really densely populated. In some circumstances, they have neighborhoods that they've kind of set off to the side. So you have kind of like social spaces, and you also have these kind of like habited spaces of multi tiered housing, and people are kind of living densely together. And so my whole research aspect is thinking about conflict and thinking about what happens in one of these communities when you have neighbors for the first time. I feel like anyone who knows someone who lives in like a homeowners association knows that like neighbors cannot be the most pleasant to be around sometimes.
Yeah.
And so having neighbors can be great because they can be really, wonderful kind of systems of buffering. They can help you share resources, you can share knowledge, you can kind of like band together against like your other neighbor that you don't like. But they can also be sources of conflict and they can be people who we don't get along with. And so I'm thinking of this from this perspective of violence. And so I study violence in this really interesting period of early urbanization. So I focus on a site called Baba Dra. It's in southern Jordan, right on the Dead Sea Plain. And it's just a fascinating site for the fact that they have one of these walled communities here. So they've got a large wall. We're not really I don't feel like archaeologists are in a full agreement about like what this wall's function was. Some people are like, oh, it was purely a fortification. It's to keep attackers out. There's not a lot of evidence for that.
Hmm.
So some people are like, it's a front. They're trying to make themselves look really powerful and really intimidating. And then other people are like, oh, it's a community works project and everybody just gets together and builds a wall. And it like helps people be socially cohesive. So there's a lot of different hypotheses. But from my perspective, we've got this walled community. So what happens when we're all kind of behind this wall? And how do we interact with each other? How do we interact with others who aren't within our wall? And that's kind of all I research. So looking at fracture rates in the people who were buried in the cemetery there. It's a really cool cemetery.
Oh, so I was reading a little bit about it online last night because it seems like they have a few different like burial structures and types.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, I was actually wondering roughly like what time period or early Bronze Age, but like kind of like what years are we looking at? Because early Bronze Age is actually kind of big.
Yeah, it's absolutely massive. So approximately we're looking at about 3,800 BCE to about 2000 BCE. These dates kind of shift on like what site you're at or like who is making up the dates. But the period that I study really specifically is the early Bronze Age 2 3. And this is about 3150 BCE to about 2400 BCE. So I always tell people that we're kind of like working at about approximately 5,000 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's this is the best part about anthropology is that you can learn things from that long ago and like make like actual substantial contributions. Uh can you tell me a little bit about like what subsistence looked like there? Like how did people survive? Like what were they doing to live?
Yeah, so the people there were doing a lot of different things to kind of survive in this environment. They were agropastoralists, so they're, herding sheep, goat, and they also are doing agriculture. So we know from the paleobotanical remains at the site, so basically like the leftovers of plants that were found at this area, we know that they were consuming a lot of figs, a lot of wheat and barley. They've got this in really, really high degrees, I guess is the best way to phrase that. But they're kind of consuming all these different things and they're also trading with other people. So this period is a really interesting time as well because there's long distance trading going on. The Southern Levant, when you kind of look at it on a map, it's along all these different trade routes going from kind of, up in the north Near East all the way down into Egypt. And so they kind of fall perfectly along that. And so they're getting lots of different trade items coming through. We know they're trading with places like Egypt. Now, whether is that directly or whether that's kind of indirectly, but like pottery from Babadra has been found in Egyptian tombs. So we know that like there's long distance contact, there's long distance trading, and they're surviving both on like agriculture that they're growing locally and animals that they're raising locally. And they're also, having a little special good. You sometimes you trade for something special
Yeah,
and you have a
totally.
little, we have like one jujube at the site. Like somebody had a delightful little jujube enjoying, some non-local goods. There's things like that that people are kind of, they're not just surviving, they're also, in some circumstances, getting to have some luxuries as well.
So that also probably plays into the violence potentially is like differences in socioeconomic access to goods and class.
Yeah, so that's one of the fascinating things about this time period, and one of the reasons why I kind of narrowed in on the Southern Levant to ask my ultimate questions, which is, why do some people face violent conflict and others don't? Is because there's not a lot of social differentiation going on at the site.
Interesting.
Yeah, so everyone's being buried in really similar ways. There's not a lot of differences in the kind of goods that are being included in these burials. Some may have a little bit more and some may have a little bit less. So, what we're really kind of looking at is maybe variation in access that we have, but there's really not a substantial like elite group and a paupers group. There's not like, this lower income, lower socioeconomic class and a higher socioeconomic class. And you might see that in other places that are doing early urbanization, but you don't really see it in places like Babadra. And so that's what makes it even more interesting to ask these questions of violence is, why would we see violence there?
Yeah.
It takes that kind of socioeconomic class question out of there, that it's really not, like people imposing upon a lower class, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. We were talking to a Roman bioarchaeologist earlier this year, and she, obviously they have like a whole army and like there's a lot of evidence of violence if you were in the army, not that surprisingly, but also like within communities as well. Oh, actually, I did also want to ask you. You're talking about urbanization. I think people tend to kind of default into what they think about as urban in 2025. What constitutes urban in the early Bronze Age?
Boy, is that a good question. And boy, is that a question that like everyone is asking, because there's actually a lot of archaeologists who would kind of maybe not like me using the term urban. And that's mostly because they're very famous archaeologist, V. Gordon Child, kind of divined a classification system for how we look for urbanization in the past. And some of those classifications that they don't actually meet the Southern Levant. So, like a system of writing, you see that in Egypt and you see that in Mesopotamia. And we don't really have a organized system of writing going on in the Southern Levant. And they know it exists. They have contact with these other places. They aren't, like they don't not know that you can write. They just aren't doing it.
Huh.
It's just not their thing. And so I try to kind of explain it, that they're kind of doing their own system of what makes them urban. And so it's been described by archaeologists in this region as kind of this concept of urban habitus, or this like urbanistic way that you think about being urban and that kind of controls your everyday life. And so this kind of like sociality of urbanization. So what is that all going to mean in the Southern Levant?
Yeah.
It just means that we get together in these communities, we live close together, we operate in these systems that are around kind of these larger, structured, larger domestic, larger. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining
No, no.
this.
I think I'm. You tell me if I'm picking
Yeah,
up what you're putting down.
yeah,
You have a community of people who have some degree. Each individual has some degree of specialization, and they must live in concert in order to kind of thrive.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's this choice of people to move into these communities, to agglomerate together and to kind of like be like, we want to be urban. We want to live within these walled communities. We want to exist within this sphere of urbanization, whatever that means to us, because it doesn't last forever.
Hmm.
At the end of this kind of early Bronze Age period, they actually all decide maybe urbanization isn't for us. And they all kind of like move outside of these communities. And so it's a way of kind of people shifting their thoughts about how they want to live in density next to each other, how they want to live in relation to kind of systems of. This is really like a hard question to answer. But
I
like
only
how
ask hard
people.
questions.
I know, I was like, I feel like I'm defending my dissertation again, or defending my perspectives. It's really a system, I think, of how people want to live, and do they want to live in these kind of communities where they live in neighborhoods, they occupy these market spaces, they are doing these kind of larger communal projects like building and maintaining walls and building and maintaining these large cemeteries, because the cemetery is occupied before and after
Hmm.
this urban community kind of sprawls up at Baba Draw.
Mhm.
They just change the way in which they bury people to having less individuals within a tomb. So during the kind of early Bronze Age 2-3, this kind of urban period, there's much more individuals. So several hundreds compared to several dozen within a tomb. So it's kind of this concept of larger systems of like, this is us, larger systems of this is who we are, and kind of a much more scaled up version than what they're doing in the past.
Totally.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's hard to kind of explain exactly what urban is,
It's totally fair.
especially
I guess.
because everyone's debating it. Because when we think of urban now, we think of giant cities and we think of all these different landscapes. And in the past, IDing what an urban is, a lot of people base that on like what's going on in Mesopotamia. But there's also different things that are going on throughout the world that are very complex and very interesting and not like living in village societies and not like being migratory pastoralists. And there's things that are going on that are larger scale without being exactly what's going on in Mesopotamia.
Right. Like, I think that this is a trap a lot of people fall into, which is they feel like it has to be one thing. Like they refuse to see the spectrum of possibility. Like, for example, I think the classic example is nature versus nurture. People are like, it's either one or the other. And it's like, it's both. It's a spectrum. And for each like characteristic that you're talking about, it is some combination therein, right? It doesn't have to be 50-50, you know. So I think that happens. People really like simple answers, and that I think is what
Yeah.
happens.
I feel like there's things that, when we have these village communities in this earlier period, they're not on the same level of like even city planning. So, like, once you get to these kind of walled communities, they've got designated streets, they've got roads that are being constructed, you've got designated shopping centers and places where there are people doing craft production. And it's just a different scale than what you're going to see. It's not that people aren't doing all of these kind of tasks and they're not planning their environment and they're not doing craft production before. It's just on the scale that you see it and the kind of organization that goes into that. And also the cooperation that goes into a larger community to say, okay, we're all going to be together in this area and we're going to somehow make it work. And I think that sometimes it works really well and sometimes there's some growing pains. And that's what I want to study is like the growing pains. Like, where do we
Yeah.
find that conflict?
This is a perfect segue into it. So like you're talking about a community that for on the whole seems to like generally get on pretty well with each other, but you are finding evidence of violence.
Yes, I am definitely finding evidence of violence. So I am very recent into analyzing a lot of the results from my dissertation. And so about one third of the individuals that I studied from a very specific burial structure at Baba Draw have evidence of cranial trauma, which is a pretty high percentage if you're thinking one third of your individuals are going to have like a fracture to your skull.
Yeah, like cranial trauma that leaves evidence because there's all kinds of cranial trauma that doesn't leave skeletal evidence at all. Said
Yeah.
by someone who's had 5 concussions.
Yes, absolutely. There's lots of types of traumatic injury that are not going to leave any evidence on the body. So having something that is both of, a force great enough to kind of crack the skull and leave this permanent fracture there is significant. It's also the case that you could argue, like, okay, how do I know that there wasn't like a group of warriors who came in and just like slaughtered this whole group of people? And like, that's why I see so many cranial traumas. And my argument is that a lot of these are healed. So people have survived for very long times past receiving these cranial traumas. A lot of them have multiple ones of various different sizes. And so it's totally realistic that some of these people are receiving these outside of the community and coming back here.
And I mean that's interesting in and of itself too, right? That they are surviving because that also goes to this ethos of community. Like you get hurt and someone takes care of you.
Well, and I kind of argue as well of like, if you get in an argument with your neighbor, you might hit your neighbor, but you're not necessarily trying to kill your neighbor.
Hmm.
So this kind of concept of things not being lethal is interesting as well, because it's one third of the community with cranial fractures that are not lethal. They didn't die around the time of receiving them. And so they're surviving for, significant periods of time to have that healing.
Can I also ask, have you been able to tease out, because again, as someone who's had 5 concussions, are you able to tease out things like violence versus accidents? You know what I mean?
Yes. So that is, boy, a difficult question to ask. So there's a lot of different kind of ways in which people have asked this question, because that's truly the big question of like, how do you know if someone fell and they broke their arm? How do you know someone fell and broke their arm and not that someone hit them with something that broke their arm? Really difficult to tell. So a lot of people have kind of questioned this in different ways. One is looking at patterning through the body. So kind of looking at where people receive traumatic injury throughout their body and kind of questioning, does that tell a story? So if someone maybe has a broken nose and maybe they also have some broken ribs and maybe they have some broken bones on the hand and maybe they're coming from medieval London, maybe we can think like maybe they're, something's going on that maybe they're having some type of conflict that is going to correspond to them having this kind of pattern of violence, and maybe it relates to this certain circumstance of living in this community. Then there's the concept of, okay, well, maybe we see someone with like a broken leg and they live in a really rocky environment. And maybe they're also from a pastoral group. Maybe this is something that just happened accidentally. And so this is a way that people kind of look at patterns and also kind of contextualize people's environments to think of what is the most likely story? What is the most likely scenario that someone would result in these traumatic injuries? And then I think the less or more productive way, I guess, depending on how you look at it, is people using forensic studies to actually kind of tease this out. And so there's a really famous kind of series of forensic studies that define something called the hat brim line. So this is a line that kind of falls across your head where the brim of a hat would fall. And they interpret that anything that kind of occurs above this line is more likely to be associated with violent trauma, and anything below this line is more likely to be associated with accidents. Well, the issue with this is they're getting all this data from, if I remember correctly, I think it's hospital records or it's mortuary records. I would have to double check. But all of this data is coming from adult males in Canada. So you have to question, is this result suggesting universally what we know about like patterning and cranial trauma? And we know that violence is going to occur at the top of the head, or is it just reflective of like patterns of violence in Canada?
Yeah. That's also just crazy to me because it's like I worked in bars for a long time. When people get in fistfights, they aim at your face, which is below the hat brim line.
Yes. And that's one of the things that's so fascinating about that as well, is that is completely culturally defined. So there's
Really?
multiple studies. One is by very famous anthropologist Walker, Philip Walker, who was looking at cultural patterns of violence and kind of teasing out exactly what these larger scale patterns can tell us about violence throughout history. And he found that the influence of boxing, so professional boxing, punching
Huh.
people, is what culturally determined how we fight in conflicts that are outside of maybe a sporting event. And so the rate of like traumatic injury to the face, the concept that when I'm fighting someone, I'm going to punch them in the face, has been more culturally determined by boxing than just like what humans do when they're being violent. It's all this concept of like culture is ultimately going to determine violence, which is why I find it so fascinating.
Dude, that is so cool. I say super professionally.
Yeah, no, I think the cultural specificity of violence. So knowing that like in certain cultures, certain types of violence are completely fine. I mean, I like to always, when I'm talking to undergraduates and I'm teaching them about concepts of violence and teaching them about like violence just as a area of research and kind of separating it from what we think of violence, because we live in a very violent society. You see violence on the news every day. You see large amounts of genocides occurring all over the world. And so how do we kind of reconcile researching violence in the past and disassociating kind of our current conceptions of violence? Because I don't think there's a lot of people that would say they're like pro violence. So I always propose to my students that one, there's no concept of senseless violence. Violence means something to someone somewhere all the time. It's always going to have someone that it means something to.
Hmm.
And then the other concept is football. And so, as Americans, most people look at football and do not see it as something that is quite violent. But when you look at the accident rate of football players and you look at the aggression of football players and how, you know, tackling someone to the ground might not be from a violent place within a football player, but it's still a violent act. It can still harm someone quite significantly. And maybe the intention isn't there for them to be harmed, but they may be harmed anyway.
Hmm.
And that goes into like all these concepts of how do we define violence? Does there have to be intent to harm to make someone violent and to make something violent? Violence is it just spirals completely when you start thinking about like how do we define it? Well, how do you identify it? There's a lot of definitions for violence.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the themes of this episode is that there's people are attempting to define things and it can
Yeah.
get super complicated. I think most of the biggest academic catfights are over definitions ultimately.
Oh yeah, and I feel like violence definitely falls in that. And I mean, I'm definitely of the camp that says you kind of need to have the intent to harm someone, or it creates it into an accident. I like to follow those definitions, which are the majority. But I mean, from a spectator who, if you were an alien come down to Earth watching football, you may watch that and think, wow, that is a really violent act of performative violence, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
My
So
no, no,
anyway.
no, totally. It's my parents. My parents are immigrants, and they were very staunchly like maybe staunchly is the wrong word, but they did not understand American football. They're like it's brutal. There's no point. It's just glorifying violence, and so there was no American football in my house growing up at all. Soccer, football to the rest of the world, yes, which is crazy because there are quite a few injuries in soccer as well.
Oh yeah.
But
But it's I mean, it just rates the whole different kind of category of cultural conceptions of what's violent and what's not violent.
Mhm.
To some people, yeah, football is the glorification of violence. And to some people, football is the epitome of American culture. And so there's just different ways in which we're all going to kind of view this based on our culture, based on, where we grew up, and based on kind of cultural conceptions of what is acceptable and what isn't. And that's the same now as it was 5,000 years ago.
Totally. Totally. Okay, so 5,000 years ago, head injuries. You're finding a lot of head injuries. What do you think's going on?
So, to a degree, I definitely think some people are hitting each other on the head. So I feel like one third of the population isn't like accidentally getting like knocked on the head by like falling objects or like getting kicked in the head by a donkey. Like
Mhm.
I feel like to a degree, there is some type of conflict going on. And I think that's a pretty fair argument saying one third of the population there. If one third of your population is getting kicked by a donkey, at a certain point you figure something out.
Yeah. Yep.
But I feel like I'm really, really early on in the kind of data analysis process. And I'm really early on in kind of my interpretations to make any large, sweeping determinations for what's going on at Baba Draw and what's going on in the Southern Levant at this time period.
Mhm.
But I think saying that one third of the population has cranial trauma is a great way to say that not everything is purely cooperative at Baba Draw, whether that be between local communities, whether that be within the community at Baba Draw, everyone isn't getting along. And so I think the next step is why? And were people getting along just as well or just as poorly before or after we have this kind of urban experimentation going on? Because it doesn't ultimately last. Like they experiment with it and then they kind of decide that it's not for them. I mean, after a couple hundred years, it's a couple hundred-year
Yeah.
experiment
Yeah.
and they leave.
Mhm.
And so we know that it doesn't last forever. So I feel like that's kind of the next step is wondering, did this kind of conflict contribute to that? Or is it just, part of existing in this area and the cultural conceptions of violence in this area? Maybe nothing changes before or after this kind of urban experiment. And that's also really interesting.
Totally. Totally. Can I ask you how are you getting access to these study materials? Like where are you doing this study? How does that work?
Yeah. So all of the individuals that I study from Baba Draw are actually located at the University of Notre Dame right now. They are on long term loan from the Department of Antiquities in Jordan. So they are here with the full permission of the Jordanian government to be researched. So the entire intent of them being here is to be a research collection. So
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I was curious because it's, there's always questions of like, how did you get access to this? And also like, I was like, maybe you've been to Jordan. I don't know.
I have been to Jordan. Yeah, I have actually visited the site of Baba Draw. I've been to Jordan.
Cool.
I, yeah, I mean, I think it was just important to not just sit in a lab in the United States and like examine these people's bones. I think it's just as important to go to where they lived and kind of experience their environment and see what kind of terrain they were living in and kind of see where they were buried. I think that's all really important to understanding their life in the past. I think it's really critical to not just see kind of, a skeleton on a table as this like disembodied, removed kind of object that you can just look at and say, okay, this, and this. I think it's really important to think about them as people who were existing in a landscape and they were existing in a community and they were moving around and they were doing different things and they had friends and they
Getting
had
kicked by
enemies and they
donkeys.
had, they were getting kicked by donkeys. They're doing lots of different things
Hmm.
existing in the past. And I think that's what myself and many bioarchaeologists are trying to do is kind of tell their stories to a degree and kind of understand more of their life and communicate their lives to others.
Yeah. I think that that is, for me, one of the biggest draws to biological anthropology and bioarchaeology and history, which is like kind of where I came up because I think sometimes people are tempted to think that the past has nothing to do with them. But the questions of violence that you're discussing are still relevant today. It's still something that we grapple with. I was just talking to a couple of researchers about insane asylums, as they called them in the 1800s, and how they would build them really far away because NIMBYs existed in the 1850s too. It's like people think that the things that we grapple with today are completely new, and a lot of them aren't. Just the shape of them are new.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, we're going to switch gears completely because you are my grad student of the year.
Yes. So we've been talking about that for a long time. So feel free to cut as much of that out as you want.
Nope,
Um,
we're going to keep pretty much all of it.
cut as much of it out as you want. Um, but
But
yeah,
no, I wanted to ask you, what is it like to be in grad school right now? What is that like? What was your application process like? If you have any suggestions for people who are perhaps interested or considering grad school, if you have anything for them, that would be wonderful to hear.
absolutely. I mean, right now I feel like it's the brave new world of grad school, I guess. I mean, it's the brave new world of academia. A lot of tenured professors are kind of struggling with this concept, as well as graduate students of funding. We're kind of going through a really unfortunate period where science and discovery and academia aren't truly valued for all the different things that they can tell us about ourselves, but also all the different kind of services they do to humanity. And there's a lot of defunding, especially at the NSF. And I think that that is horrible for everyone who works there, but it's also really scary for a lot of people whose entire fields are funded through public grants, which is truly anthropology. A lot of research is funded through public grants. And so I think as grad students, that's very scary. I've noticed that amongst myself, and I've noticed that amongst a lots of other students kind of. I mean, I'm at the University of Notre Dame, so I'm extraordinarily privileged in that I have access to a lot of internal funding. So my research is still kind of moving forward, but I know a lot of people who are in grad school right now who actually have no idea what they are going to do because they are losing access to a lot of public grants and external funding. So that's kind of an issue right now. My greatest, I think, advice to people who want to go to graduate school is this is going to be a little bit negative, but I feel like it's something that they kind of need to hear. Um,
Hmm.
if you are doing something that you love, maybe keep doing the thing that you love. Graduate school, like some people have this perspective of graduate school of it being like this really, really, you know, elite kind of form of saying, like, I have this level of intelligence and I'm great. Or people use it as, like, I always wanted to go. So I definitely think I need to go. If you're doing something that you love with your bachelor's degree, keep doing the thing that you love, unless you're like, you have a huge, huge desire and drive to go to graduate school, because graduate school is not fun most of the time.
Yeah.
It is really, really hard. There's a lot of things that are fun about it,
Hmm.
but most of the time it's really hard. It's really grueling. It is really underpaid. So you're not always going to be really doing well off in financial areas. And I think that's one of the perspectives that's kind of your negative. So that's kind of the first thing that I always tell people is like, make sure it's really, really what you want to do. And then from that perspective, if people are like, I still want to go, It's been my lifelong goal. All I dream about is graduate school. Then I tell them to find a question. So find a question that motivates you, that drives you. If you're in anthropology, find an anthropological question. If you're outside of anthropology, find some kind of question that is going to ignite the spark in you to want to know more. So, for example, my question is, why are certain people subject to violence and others aren't? And I can apply that to a lot of different time periods and a lot of different places. And I can ask that question a million different ways. And maybe your question is, what happens when humans and primates live close to each other? And how do they get along? And how do you can ask that all over the place. Or,
Hmm.
what happens when people are faced with extreme climates? What happens when they're really, really hot climates, really, really cold climates, really high elevation? These are questions you can ask in a lot of different ways. And I think that's step number one, is finding a really great question that's going to motivate you to want to learn more, because grad school is ultimately a process of discovery. And if you don't have a question that you like and something that you feel like you want to learn more about, it will be quite difficult to enjoy the process there.
Yeah, it has to be intrinsic motivation and not extrinsic motivation for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of people can do it through extrinsic motivation. It's just
It's
the
miserable.
people who have the best time are going to be the ones who can fall back on the fact that they like what they do. They like their research.
Right. And even if you do have the intrinsic motivation, like you're still going to have some bad times.
Yeah, it's still going to be really hard.
But at least it's not as bad as if you're there because someone else thought you ought to be there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I don't think we've ever talked about this on the show, but one of the things that also I realized when I was in grad school, in some ways, you're putting your life on hold for a little bit. You come out and you're like kind of in a weird place compared to everyone else who did not go. But if that is like what you really want, then that's wonderful. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's also people who go to grad school, especially in like anthropology. So archaeologists, if you're working in cultural resource management, you might want that master's degree to move up and kind of be in a more supervisory position.
Hmm.
So maybe that's an extrinsic motivation, but if you can identify that question that you really like, that's going to
Yes.
help kind of motivate you through that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, like I think a master's degree and a master's degree is also very difficult. I have a master's degree. There's no shade to people who are like, I'm getting my master's and I'm out. But it is different than getting a PhD. Like the time commitment is very different. The expectations are different. I strongly advocate, like, if you're not 100% sure if you want to get a PhD, you're like, I think this is for me, get a master's and figure it out. It'll be a great way to figure it out without committing 7 years of your life.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And there's nothing wrong with getting a master's. I got my master's at Mississippi State University and I loved every second of it.
Hmm.
I met wonderful friends who are lifelong friends and had a really, really good time. And there was a lot of things that were extremely hard. The work commitment is really, really hard. The expectations and coursework is really, really difficult and challenging, but it was still a really great time.
Yeah.
Masters can be great. And yeah, they're like 2, 3 year commitments. And then if you want to keep going on to do a PhD. And you're also
Yeah.
set up really well because you've done your master's, you already have some research projects you've been working on, you're familiar with kind of the
You have a
system.
track record of success too. So
Yeah.
it can make it easier to be accepted into PhD programs because they're like, well, we know she can do at least most of the work. You know what I mean? Because you've done it. You got your master's degree. They're like, they could probably do a PhD. Probably.
Yeah. I feel like that gets us into like nuts and bolts of like what are they looking for and like
Hmm.
how do you pick a school and how do you apply and all of that. Like,
Do you have suggestions for how to pick a school?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I work with a lot of undergraduates here. A lot of my research assistants tend to be looking at graduate school. So makes sense. Kids who want to get involved with doing, well, not really kids, young adults who want to get
Hmm.
involved with doing lots of research tend to be the same kind of people who are interested in going on and doing a master's or doing a PhD. And so there's kind of a system that I've worked out for picking a school, for picking advisors, for setting up your kind of profile for applying. This is mostly come out of the fact that I'm a first generation college student. My parents have a GED and a high school diploma. Besides a lot of moral support, they weren't really able to help me with applying to graduate school.
Hmm.
And I was lucky enough to have a professor in undergrad who advised me a lot. And so I've kind of taken some of the things that really worked well for me and I've kind of plugged in other things that I think have worked well for others. But step one is to truly make a list. So I say identify your question. I think that's really important to have your question. And then we have make a list of schools that have programs, whether you're applying to master's or PhD, or if it's a dual program, whether it's a master to PhD, make a kind of an Excel spreadsheet of the school, what program it is, the deadline, like when your application is due, and then outlining a person that you would like to work with at that program. So the person that you would like to work with, I think is really important that they don't have to do exactly what you want to do, but they, in the sphere of what you would like to do. And then identify a couple people in the program or in, I mean, if you're in biological anthropology, you can also look in the biology department, but identify maybe
Mhm.
two or three other people at that school that could serve as members of your committee. Ultimately, in graduate school, you'll have a main advisor, someone you work with, and you'll have members of your committee that you will also work with. And I think it's important to display that you've identified a couple of those people already. That really shows the program when you start applying that you've invested in learning about their program and thinking about how you fit there. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. One of the things that I tell people whenever we talk about this, which hasn't been that often recently, is I think folks should strongly consider reaching out to their potential advisor before they apply and asking them, like, are you taking on students? Because sometimes they're not, like, and just starting that conversation with them about what your relationship could potentially look like. Professors have received these emails. Like, there's no reason to feel self-conscious about emailing people and asking what the program's like and if they're interested in you as a student.
Oh, absolutely. That's actually really awesome because that's what I call step two. So once
Oh,
you have your list,
perfect.
yeah. So I've always had like, once you have your list formed, and so many students have asked me, like, how do I start a list? Like, how do I identify advisors? Like, how do I know where they are? It's the most boring answer ever, but you have to read a paper. And if you like the paper, who wrote it? Do they work at a school that has a graduate program? Great, add it to your list.
Mhm.
Um, that's kind of how I've helped students form that list. But then step two, once you have your list, start emailing everyone on your list months before the applications are due, not a week before the applications are due, months.
Yes. Yes. Oh, very good
Yeah.
call.
And yeah, and I always have them kind of email the exact same thing of like, this is who I am. This is what I'm interested in. I've attached my CV for your purview. Are you accepting graduate students in the following year?
Mhm.
And it's really important to ask that question. Are you accepting graduate students in the following year? And then follow with, if so, would you be open to answering some questions about your program? This is a great, like, I always open this to them of like, one, they might not be accepting students. And then the conversation kind of ends there, unless they're delightful and they want to keep emailing with you.
Mhm.
And then if they are accepting students, you've already opened the line of conversation by saying, can I ask you some questions about your graduate program? Where you can then kind of ask them, what are you looking for? Do you have a research lab? Like, how many students do you currently have? There's really cool questions that you can ask and start conversation with this person to kind of, one, learn more about the program, and two, kind of start getting to know who may be your potential advisor.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Okay. Is there a step 3?
Yes, there is a step three. So,
Hit
step
me.
three, I have them after they start getting responses. And I always tell them if they don't respond to you after about 3 or 4 weeks, send them a little reminder. Professors get hundreds of emails and they don't see them all. So send them a little reminder and, just be like, just checking back in, really interested in your program, something like that. Once you started to get responses, then you can start editing your list because immediately some people might not be interested or, might not be accepting students. And then you can start taking them off your list, shorten your list down.
Mhm.
And then I like a really, really good step. You can do this before step two. You can do this after you've started getting responses. Either way, I always suggest students take that list and they show it to a trusted person at their department, a trusted person in the field, someone that they know, because people are people no matter where you go.
Mhm.
And some people are absolutely lovely and delightful, and some people aren't.
Yeah.
And I think it's really, really important that biological anthropology is not exclusive to this. And so showing this list to a trusted person, they might take one or two people off your list. And that's
Yeah.
really helpful as well, because you might not know that, let's say this person is known for working their grad students to death to the point that they all drop out of the program. And it's really well known throughout the entire field. As an undergraduate student, you may not know that.
Yeah.
And so it's good to show that to someone who can take a couple people off your list. When I showed mine to my trusted person, they took some people off my list and explained to me why they were coming off my list. So I think that's really important. And then after you've edited your list, then you get to start working on your personal statements. You get to start working on your CVs. You get to start tapering those to the actual department, which is very important to taper those to the place that you're going. And then you're not doing, maybe you have a list of 20. After these first two steps, you may be narrowed down to a list of 5. And that's a really solid number of graduate schools to go to or to apply to.
Yeah. The applications they're a lot of work,
Mhm.
and the personal statements are really important. They do read
Yeah.
all of them. They care deeply about it.
I think they care mostly about the personal statement, in my opinion.
Yeah.
CVs are very important. Your GRE score is not important. Nobody cares about that.
No, not unless you're like in the 5th percentile for like math and
No.
reading or whatever. Like it would have to be crazy low before anyone was like,
Yeah.
this might be a problem.
Most schools used COVID because during COVID, people couldn't take GREs. A lot of schools used COVID as an excuse to remove the GRE from their application
Oh,
process. So it's now
that
not
is
required at a lot of
fantastic.
universities. But yeah, no, most schools that I have either had contact with or schools that I have heard from representatives from, they're going to say that the GRE is like you have to have a certain score. And once you have above that score, they don't really care.
Yeah, and it's probably not as high as y'all think it
No.
is. You know what I mean? They're not looking for 99th, like 90, I mean, sure, 99th percentile is impressive, but like that's not generally the deciding factor.
No, they're not looking for the greatest score in the world. They're looking for a passable score that shows you have, you know, perfectly acceptable writing and reading and math skills. And the one that I've heard that matters the most to most departments is your writing score. So focusing on that, and that could be a whole episode in itself, is how to take the GRE and prepare for the GRE.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I thought like, oh, the GRE writing, I'm a great writer. And then I took the GRE and realized that they don't care if you're a good writer. They want you to write a GRE essay. Yeah,
You have to write to the test.
yeah,
You have to write to the test.
exactly.
I had to take the GRE
Yeah, I
twice,
did too.
mostly because of the math section. It turns out I did not remember geometry at all. I thought I did.
Who
I
would?
did not.
Yeah, no, I took it twice because of my writing section because I was like, I don't need to prep for writing. And then like I did not know. They have a very, very specific essay that they want. And if you write outside that
Yes.
format, they will not score you well.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like the same thing with the AP exams, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to the AP exam essays, it's like a very specific format that they're looking for. Yes. Yeah, GREs. But yes, no, the personal statements are really important. And I would also encourage you to get those done early, have multiple rounds of revision. I write professionally for a living, and I can practically hear people saying like, "Oh, I can just put it into ChatGPT."
No.
And I would I accept that AI is not going away, and it has some place in our future. I have like really strong qualms about it from like an environmental perspective, and I also think that it is taking a lot of critical thinking skills away from people. In terms of how I think you could potentially use ChatGPT, it's good at grammar. I'm not gonna lie. If you need someone to check your grammar, that's a great way to do it. I would have humans read it because there's nothing so off-putting as reading something that you can tell was generated by an AI model, especially for something that you are in theory passionate about and want to study, you know?
I feel like ChatGPT's writing is also boring. And
It's so
you don't
boring,
want your professional statement to be boring. You want it to
brutally
be
boring.
interesting. You want it to speak about you. You do not want it to be a story about you.
Mhm.
I heard a story once about someone who wrote a professional statement about how inspired they were after seeing a dead monkey on a street while they were traveling. And they were like, and then I knew my whole lifelong passion should be to study primatology. Don't do that. They don't care. I know that's like a skill that people learn for like when you're applying for college, tell your sob story.
Mhm.
They don't care about your sob story. They want something like, I mean, similar to the GRE, I feel like they want something very formulaic.
Mhm.
And this is again, like every student that I work with, I give them the formulaic version of introduce yourself, who you are.
Yes.
In your first paragraph, say what you want to study, one sentence, who you want to work with, one sentence. I think I work great in your program because of this one sentence. So if they only read one paragraph, they know who you are, what you want to do, who you want to work with, and why they should accept you.
Mhm.
And then the rest of that is expanding out on that. Who you are, your
Yes.
qualifications should have a whole paragraph of like what has prepared you for graduate school. Their qualifications, you can use a lot of things that you don't think you can use. I always come up to students who are like, well, I was just a president of this club. So how does that qualify for graduate school? If you can say that this prepared you for graduate school in a way that you learned how to organize large groups of people, you learned how to make sure that deadlines were kept. My research assistants in the lab are like, well, I just assisted you in research. No, you learned the process of forming scientific questions, of answering scientific questions, of conducting research in a lab environment.
Mhm.
There's ways to phrase that.
If you can tie that into your research interest, that's double points, right? Like I learned how to work collaboratively with people when I was the head of my anthropology club. And I think this will be very helpful in research where I have to work with international scientists. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Just always like relate it back to the thesis. And the
Mhm.
thesis is, I want to go to grad school for this.
Yeah. And then, yeah, the one paragraph that I see most people miss in their personal statement is then after you've kind of said, this is why I'm prepared for graduate school, what do you want to do in graduate school? And I think it's because that's the hardest thing for most people to kind of wrap their mind around. And I think it's also because people are really concerned and really worried that their potential advisor wants a fully formed research question and a fully formed project. They don't. They want to help you a little bit with that. They just want to know that
they
you are interested in something. That's what this question
they
is.
they are not to be offensive. They are expecting you to be an unformed
Yeah.
ball of dough because you're
Yeah.
22. You just finished undergraduate. Like you cannot be expected to know as much as someone who has done an additional 7 years of schooling.
Absolutely. They just want to know that they are getting someone who is excited about learning, who is excited about some kind of research question, and that can convey, my ultimate research question is this. For me, my ultimate research question is violence and identity. Who is subject to violence and who isn't? I want to answer that potentially by looking at these different things.
Hmm.
That's all great. And sometimes talking those emails with that person that you might have as a potential advisor can help you formulate that research question because they may be like, hey, I've been looking for a graduate student to work with me on this project. That can help you kind of get an idea of what your research is going to be.
Yeah.
But I feel like most people miss that one.
Yeah.
And then the next paragraph really is coming home with, I want to work with this person for this reason. And it can't be because they seem delightful. It has to be, I want to work with them because our research interests align, because we have similar methods that we use, because, I find their research in this area to be engaging. And then go past that and say, as potential members of my committee, and remember all those other people that you identified at the university. That's where you
So
say,
smart.
as potential members of my committee, I'm interested in these different people to work with. And that shows them that not only are you interested in one person there, you're interested in the full department, you're interested in the university. You aren't just coming to work with one person and then peace out. You want to be part of their intellectual community. And that matters.
That and it shows that you understand how it works, right? which is this big part of it. Like you're not, yeah, that is great advice.
Yeah, and I feel like that is the advice. I mean, there's been so many studies that come out and show that the majority of people who end up in academia and go to grad school have people in their family or parents who have had advanced degrees. And it makes sense because they understand how it works. They understand the process of getting in. And that's really been what I've tried to do because, I was given this great help as an undergraduate who had no idea what to do and would have never been able to get into graduate school without the advice that I got. I've been trying to kind of pass this on to other people who don't know how this process works because it really is not as complicated as they make it seem. They make it seem impossible and convoluted. And it's a lot of work to, do all these applications and to email people and to do personal statements. But there is kind of a formula to it. And once you know the formula, it's a lot less, I feel like it's a lot less scary.
The way that I describe it is that it's frequently it's time intensive rather than like actually difficult.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I bake a lot. So there's like a lot of recipes that aren't that hard, but it's going to take 5
Oh,
hours,
yeah,
you
absolutely.
know? It's the same thing. It's a grad school, same thing. It's a batch of cookies. I wish. Cool. Well, this has been wonderful. Is there anything that you would like to talk about or would like to say that we didn't touch on about your research, about grad school?
Uh, I think the only thing that I always recommend students do for grad school, just as like, once maybe you've done your list, maybe you've done everything else, maybe you're trying to pick where do you go? You get accepted to four amazing schools. Like, where are you going to go? One is where the money is.
Mm-hmm.
Always go where the money is. If someone's offering you a full funding package, don't shy away from that. It's okay to treat it like a job and to take money.
Yeah.
And then also, I think it's really important to make sure that you have read things that the person you want to work with has written and that you like the way they write. And this is such an obscure, weird comment of like, what do you mean, like the way they write? Everyone writes differently.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read their writing and you don't like it, odds are they're not going to like your writing. And it's going to make it a really difficult relationship for however long you're in graduate school because you're just different writers. It doesn't mean that one of you is better than the other or one of you is bad or like good. You just write differently. And I feel like that's such an underrated thing of like being able to have a similar writing style and like the way your advisor writes.
That is actually so smart. I obviously came out of academia and then I worked as an editor for years. And the first 6 months that I worked as an editor in the quote unquote real world in corporate America, I had multiple people tell me that I was way too brutal because like you get used to like academic writing is like it's a brutal editing process, or it can be. You know what I mean? To be fair, it's a very different vibe working with someone whose entire livelihood is writing and you're like, I didn't like this, rewrite it. That makes them scared that they will not get money in the future. Even if you're like, to me, I was like, oh, I didn't like it. I just needed you to rewrite. Um, anyway, the point is that is huge. And that is so true. There are some people that I've read their stuff and I'm like, God, this is horrible.
Yeah, I think it's
And
really
they're
important.
brilliant. They're brilliant. Right. But it's just the writing. You're right. The writing's not for
Yeah,
me.
not all smart people are great writers.
Wow.
I always say that to my
No.
students too, who are like, I didn't understand this paper. And they think they're stupid. Maybe they're a bad writer. That's
Yeah.
actually an option. That if you didn't understand a scientific paper and it was meant to be for, an introductory audience, or it wasn't like a highly, highly special methodological paper, maybe they're just a
Hmm.
bad writer and maybe you're not the problem.
Yeah. And there's only so much because you're like, oh, surely that goes through reviewers and editors. And it's like, yes, but there's only so much that they're going to be able to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yes, I care about writing a lot. So if anyone has any writing questions, I guess feel free to hit me up.
I do too. I feel like I am not a good writer. I think I've gotten better at writing, but I feel like all I ever want to do is be like the best and clearest communicator possible. Because I think that's our job. Like if you're a scientist, your job is not to do science, it's to communicate science. Like you are to communicate science in a certain degree.
Yeah.
And I feel like so many of us are just need to work on our communication skills. We need to be a better communicator to communicate the work we do. And why it's important, because I feel like that, we have such science illiteracy going on right now. And
Yes.
there's a lot of things that people can blame. But I think if we want to do something to change it, a lot of us who do science have to be better at communicating that science.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I think that is definitely true. I also have a lot of thoughts about how science communication works now and how science communication works in like the press generally. Cause I think that just very generally, like a lot of journalists don't have enough of the
Yeah.
foundation to be able to communicate things clearly. And that's not really their fault necessarily,
Hmm.
but we're not doing them any favors either. So yeah. Anyway, writing. I'm so happy to talk about, but I feel like I've already taken up so much of your time.
Yeah.
So let me ask you the final three questions of the interview. The first is if someone wanted to learn more about the kind of work you do. So like working in the early Bronze Age, the Levant, violence. Like, is there a good place for them to start? Is there like a good introductory resource?
Yeah. I feel like if someone's really, really interested in learning about violence, I feel like the good kind of introduction to that is the bioarchaeology of violence, which is, I can make sure that there's a citation for this for you to list along with the episode. But
Yes,
I feel like,
it'll go in the show notes. Don't
yeah, I
worry.
feel like that's a really great place for people to get introduced to kind of the bioarchaeology of violence and how bioarchaeologists investigate that and kind of how violence occurs in cultures all throughout time. I think that's really cool source. And then if you're interested in the Southern Levant, there's a really great, especially for the early Bronze Age. The kind of the go-to volume right now is by Greenberg. I think it's technically called like the early Bronze Age Southern Levant. But I will also make sure there's a citation for that. But that's a really good introductory source as well. So those are really, really good, just kind of like academic-y sources, but they're written much more accessibly for students who are kind of getting involved in this.
That's perfect. Yeah, yeah. You gotta love scientists. It's exactly what it says on the tin.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Second question is, what are you reading for work right now?
Yeah, I'm a terrible grad student. So I am not reading a lot for work right now. I am doing a lot of dissertation writing. So I'm doing a lot of checking back sources that I've already read.
Hmm.
So I guess a lot of what I am kind of going back to and rereading is a lot of stuff that has to do with patterning of violence. So looking at the types of cranial trauma and the patterns between individuals within a society. So, do males have different traumatic injury than females, or children than adults, or do lower class and higher class individuals have different patterns of violent conflict? That's a lot of what I'm reading right now. And then I guess kind of I was like, I feel like if someone was really interested in that, there's a really, really great article that I always recommend to people by Kirkauka that's looking at like patterns of violence in medieval London. And yeah, it's really great and kind of looking at how lower class and upper class kind of court systems might have influenced how people interact with each other and kind of solved conflict, which is a really interesting article and talks about drunken brawling and how drunken brawling might have influenced patterns of violence seen. It's a really good one. I'll make sure that one's available as well.
Yeah, definitely send that to me. I'm interested in reading it. I will send you one back about brawling in colonial Virginia amongst the landed gentry, which I love. I still think about that article all the time. Last question: what are you reading or consuming for fun right now?
Yeah, so I normally have more than one book that I'm reading at a time, so I trade out. So none of them are very educational. Well, I guess one is. I just finished the Hunger Games book, the newest one, Sunrise on the Reaping.
Oh, I didn't realize there was a new book.
Yeah, there's a
I'm
new
very out
one.
of touch
It
right
is
now.
very good. And then I'm reading Julia Fox's autobiography, which is absolutely wild. And I'm also reading Everything is Tuberculosis, John Green's newest book about tuberculosis, which is really fun. So three very, very different kind of books. But yeah, all three of those pretty much is what I've been reading. And then other than that, I mostly just consume video games. So I'm a huge gamer.
Yeah.
I play video games almost every day. So
I mean, I think that's great. I think it's I think it's a really great way to unwind. As I mentioned, my parents are much like there was no American football in the house, there were no video games allowed. And I think that there is like a neural connection that must be formed when you're younger, because when you attempt to pick it up in your 30s, it's not fun. It's like I can't, there's like literally like the controllers, like I can't move effectively.
Oh yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah, it makes complete sense actually.
Yeah, it's like I need it. It's like it's something that you need to forge in like a younger brain, or I have to commit a lot more time to it, and
Yeah.
it's like it's not. It's just not
And then
fun
it's
at
not
that
a
point. You know what
hobby.
I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
I
So.
I've been playing video games since I was a kid. Actually, weirdly enough, I do a lot of weird side project stuff in my career, and I always joke that if you want to make your hobby into something productive, you can just start studying it with and mesh it with your research specialty. So I actually have like a lot of side projects looking at like the archaeology of video games. So yeah, me and a couple friends have presented at conferences looking at like archaeology and video games. There's like a world building game called Valheim, and we were looking at like
That's
trash and how people dispose of their trash, because it was a really interesting thing in the game where when people built objects, you couldn't actually disassemble them. And so when people no longer needed the object, they were trying to figure out how to get rid of it because they never despawned in game. So people would like dig giant trash pits to like throw stuff in, or like go out into the middle of the ocean and like throw it in the ocean. So we did a whole thing amazing about like what can we learn about early settlement patterns from like trash in Valheim. And then I played The Sims since I was a kid, and so The Sims has
hmm
archaeology in it, which a lot of people don't know. So we've talked about. I've done a presentation looking at like messaging of archaeology in The Sims and what it actually says about archaeologists. Hilariously, there's only certain worlds in which you can do archaeology in, and they're never like in your local world. So talking about how like archaeology is this thing that occurs like far off and far away, exotic places, and not like
hmm In
everywhere.
Arizona.
And
Yeah.
there's things like that that I think are really interesting about video games. But yeah, there's a lot of people who study that as well. The archaeology of video games. It's a huge kind of little field.
I had no. I'm gonna go look that up as soon as we sign off. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com. That's spelled GABY.LAPERA@anthrobiology.com. This show is produced by me. Music courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear at Sound of Picture.